Daf Yomi, tractate Zevachim, page 94b. Last line of the previous Amud was saying that Rava said, nevertheless, if something poses a difficulty for me, according to my opinion, that everyone agrees that the halacha with regard to laundering applies to soft leather, this is what poses a difficulty for me. And now we're on the top of 94b. At the top of the page, with the words Karim. Karim Sasos Drachininu Utinan Hayt Shilon Zinaleha Maim Adchetichle Elam Rabbe Kol Kibus Lesle Kieskus Loshme Kibus. Cushions and blankets that are of soft leather and for which the halacha with regard to laundering should be relevant, and yet we learned about them in the Mishnah Shabbat 142b. If the filth was on a cushion of leather, he applies water to it until the filth dissolves, which indicates that the halacha with regard to laundering is not applicable even to soft leather. Rather, Rava said, with regard to any laundering that does not include rubbing, it is not considered laundering. Consequently, one may apply water to a soft leather cushion, but soft leather remains subject to laundering so long as there is rubbing. And that statement that Rav Chia bar Ashi said many times, I would stand before Rav on Shabbat and place water on his leather shoes, may be explained accordingly. With regard to placing water on leather, yes, that is permitted. But with regard to laundering, which includes rubbing, it is not permitted. This may be explained as follows. If Rav Chia bar Ashi spoke of soft leather shoes, then all agree that only placing water is permitted. And if Rav Chia bar Ashi spoke of hard leather shoes, the distinction between placing and rubbing accords with the opinion of the others, who hold that the requirement of laundering sprayed blood applies even to hard leather. Ihachi beged nami, beged shriyaso zeu kibuso. The Gemara asks if that is so, that placing water upon something is not considered laundering, so long as one does not also rub the item. Then with regard to a non-leather garment as well, one should be allowed to place water upon it on Shabbat. Why does the cited Mishnah state that one may wipe it away only with a dry rag? The Gemara answers, with regard to the garment, its soaking is its laundering, and merely placing water on it is forbidden. Rava Zimei, Rava Zorak Suda Lamaim Chayv, Zorak Mishtan Lamaim Chayv, Mishtan Suda Rava Kibus, Elezer Mishtan Maitaimu. The Gemara comments, Rava conforms to his standard line of reasoning. As Rava says, if one casts a cloth into water on Shabbat, he is liable for laundering on Shabbat, as it is made of fabric like any garment. And if one cast flax seeds into water, he too is liable. The Gemara analyzes the statement. Granted, if he casts the cloth into water, he performs laundering. But with regard to flax seed, what is the reason that one may not cast it into water on Shabbat? And if you would say that it is prohibited because it sprouts in the water and constitutes the prohibited acts of planting, if so, with regard to wheat and barley, it should also be forbidden to place it in the water. The Gemara explains casting the flax into the water is not prohibited because of planting, but because these flax seeds have discharges when soaked. If so, with regard to hides, it should also be prohibited to place them into water because they too produce discharges of water. The Gemara answers there, with regard to flaxseed, is prohibited because it affects kneading, as the discharges cause the seeds to combine together, which is not true of hides. Misali b'maya shich shuchin, al kibuz lo. Hadar okei rabba amor alei udrash. Divad mishemar v'nechem ta'uz hem yadi. Biram kach amru. Shich shuch mutar v'kibuz asur. The Gemara relates that Rava taught in public it is permitted to launder a shoe on Shabbat. And Rav Papa said to Rava, but didn't Rav Ashi say many times I would stand for Rav on Shabbat and place water on his leather shoes? Evidently placing water upon leather, yes, that is permitted. But laundering, which includes rubbing, is not permitted. Rava went back and placed an interpreter before him so that he could tell the public that he had been wrong, and taught in public the statements. I've seen this somewhere else before. That Rava, in Erevin, I think, here in 54, sounds like it. Maybe not. Rava, when he said he was wrong. The statements that I said before you earlier are my error. Truly, the sages said like this: placing water upon shoes is permitted, but laundering them is prohibited. The Tanya, I'm saying, the Tamabanan, Techaba is Bimakum Kodesh, Virskli, Cheres Benayin, Tamalema, Ukli, Cheres Hashem Tavoshavo, Yisha Vemonika, Shiva, Ukli, and Chosh Benayin, Tamalema, Immichim Chosh, Bushala, Murak, Bishutaf, Bamayin. The Mishnah teaches the laundering must be performed in a sacred place, and the breaking of an earthenware vessel must be performed in a sacred place, and the scourging and rinsing of a copper vessel must be performed in a sacred place. From where are these matters derived, as the sages taught in Braita? Concerning a garment upon which blood was sprayed, the verse states, "You shall launder that on which it shall be sprinkled in a sacred place." Leviticus 6:20. From where is the halacha with regard to the breaking of an earthenware vessel in which a sin offering was cooked derived? The subsequent verse states, "And the earthenware vessel in which it is cooked shall be broken." Leviticus 6:21. From where is the halacha with regard to the scourging and rinsing of a copper vessel in which a sin offering was cooked derived? The verse states immediately thereafter, "And if it be cooked in a copper vessel, it shall be scoured and rinsed in water." The Mishnah teaches with regard to this matter, this urgency applies to sin offering more than it applies to offerings of the most sacred order. The Gemara asks, and are there no more halachot specific to sin offering? But there is this halacha, that as blood enters the innermost sanctum to be sprinkled. The Gemara answers, the Mishnah is dealing with external sin offerings. As halacha applies only to external sin offerings, Shem nichnas dama lifnai lifnim pasula, because be kiva. The Gemara challenges, but there is a scripture that there is a stricture that if blood enters into the sanctuary, it becomes disqualified. The Gemara explains the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Yehoshua, who says every offering is blood, not only that of a sin offering that enters the sanctuary to atone becomes disqualified. Therefore, this is not a halacha specific to sin offering. Shekim mechaperin al chayve karisos mechatos teshmius kol. The word challenges, but there is the halacha that the external sin offerings atone for those who are liable to receive excision, karet, through unintentional sins. The Gemara explains the Mishnah includes an offering that does not have that halacha, as its principles apply to a sin offering brought for hearing the voice, meaning falsely taking an oath that one is unable to testify. In another's case, this transgression is not punishable by karet. Shikein tu'nava matanois k'Rabbi Shmuel damar kol damim tu'nava matanois ala makaranois. The Gemara challenges But there is the stricture or the stringency, that the blood of a sin offering requires 4 placements on the altar, unlike other offerings of the most sacred order. The Gemara explains this mission is composed in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, who says that all blood of offerings requires 4 placements, one upon each of the 4 corners of the altar. Accordingly, this is not a halacha limited to the sin offering. Ha'ika keren, פרק אצבע, פרק יחודה, אלא חד מיתרי תלתה חומרי נקת. The Gemara asks, and even according to your reasoning, can it be said that there is only one halacha that applies to a sin offering, but does not apply to other offerings? Isn't there the requirement to place a sin offering's blood on the corner at the top of the altar? Isn't there the requirement that a priest place the sin offering's blood on the altar with his finger? Isn't there the requirement to place it on the edge of the altar? Therefore, it should not be assumed that this is the only halakha unique to a sin offering, but rather that the Mishnah simply cited one of 2 or 3 stringencies. That's it for the Gemara, and now we start the new Mishnah. Zog, the Heilige Mishnah. Beged shes lechutz lekloim nichnas unichabso במקום קדוש ניתנה חוץ לקלעים קוראו נכנס מחפשו במקום קדוש כלי חרש ויעשה חוץ לקלעים נכנס ושוברו במקום קדוש נטמע חוץ לקלעים נוקבו נכנס ושוברו במקום קדוש. The Mishnah says, with regard to a garment upon which the blood of sin offering was sprayed, it went outside the curtains, meaning the temple courtyard, before being laundered, the garment re-enters the courtyard and one launders it in a sacred place. If the garment became ritually impure outside the curtains, one tears the garment in order to render it ritually pure, enters the courtyard with it, and launders it in a sacred place. With regard to an earthenware vessel, in which a sin offering was cooked, that went outside the curtains, the vessel re-enters the courtyard and one breaks it in a sacred place. If the vessel became ritually impure outside the curtains, one punctures the vessel to render it ritually pure, and one enters the courtyard with it and breaks it in a sacred place. With regard to a copper vessel in which a sin offering was cooked that went outside the curtains, the vessel re-enters the courtyard. One scours it and rinses it in a sacred place. If the vessel became ritually impure outside the curtains, one breaks the vessel by boring a large hole into it to render it ritually pure, and enters the courtyard with it and scours and rinses it in a sacred place. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches if the garment became ritually impure outside the curtains, one tears the garment in order to render it ritually pure, enters the courtyard with it, and launders it in a sacred place. Ravina objects to this. How can the Mishnah say that one tears it? The Merciful One states in the Torah that one must launder a garment. Leviticus 6:20. And once this article is torn, this is no longer a garment, but only a scrap of cloth. The Gemara answers, the Mishnah describes a scenario when he leaves untorn a fragment of the garment that is size enough, or a small cloth. Is that so? If he leaves such a portion intact, is he still permitted to bring the garment back into the courtyard? But doesn't Rav Huna say, the sages taught, that an impure garment, most of which has been torn, loses its impurity only when one did not leave of it enough for a small cloth. But if he left enough of it untorn for a small cloth, it is considered a joining of the pieces, and the garment remains ritually impure. Accordingly, leaving a piece that size would not serve any purpose with regard to ritual impurity.